how do we transcend and become like just the best version of ourselves possible so that we can go in any situation being creative, kind, loving, and just collaborative, and just like, again, the best version of ourselves. And somebody cuts us off in traffic, we can kind of just laugh about it and like just let it go and see what it is for really what it is, which is, it is what it is. It's not a big deal. So what I do every morning is I have, like, several books that I read that are kind of like my Bible. I journal, I read those. They get my mindset right for that. It's encouraging. It's filled with good reminders, and it helps me to kind of go back and really think about, really kind of pause when something comes up, and then just be like, okay, I'm recognizing that. I see that. I see what I'm doing right now.
What does it take to transition from family business leadership to venture capital, M&A, and sustainable investing? In this episode of Going Beyond the Deal, I sit down with John Ziss, President and CEO of Coral EV, to discuss his journey through entrepreneurship, leadership, and strategic business growth. John shares how growing up in a family business shaped his leadership mindset, and why stepping away to gain outside experience was a game changer. He also dives into his work in private equity, renewable energy, and EV infrastructure, offering insights on how businesses can scale strategically while staying ahead of industry shifts. If you're an entrepreneur, investor, or business leader looking to navigate growth, embrace change, and leverage sustainability for long-term success, this episode is packed with valuable takeaways and lessons learned from decades of experience. I hope you enjoy. Hey, John, what is going on, my friend John Ziss? I don't know how to, officially address you in this conversation. I mean, you're a man that wears, many different hats, but, just for the listeners, why don't you just introduce yourself, kind of what you're doing now, and a little bit about your background?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Well, first, thanks for having me on. You're the man. And it's a privilege. My background, I was finance and accounting undergrad. Was a bean counter for most of my life. No offense to the accountants out there, I was one of you. And then stepped into kind of a CFO role. Family business growing up, and went far away from them to the East Coast, right outside New York City, and was sucked back in. So eventually came back in, started running our family's waste to resource bulk landscape manufacturing company in Ohio, specifically the Cleveland area. We did some cool things there. Got some M&A deals done, grew the business, but also did some really cool things through waste and reuse, which I'd love to talk to you, Michael, about.
Well, before we get into waste and reuse and all that, there's, I'll share with the group how John and I met. John and I share an executive mentor, Charles Scott, that we both worked with for the last 3 or so years. And, our relationship has really grown through our mutual love of personal growth and development. But the one thing that John and I realized that we both shared in common originally was our love for music. So as some of the listeners know, just from conversations with me in the past, I left, originally I dropped out of college to play in a rock band. And I think John actually finished college, but if you could I'd love to hear a little bit about the background and the commonality that we share there.
Yeah. So that's like, that is fun because, and I'm glad you brought that up. So yeah, I graduated college, and like any other college graduate does, what do you do? I started a band. All right. So yeah, I did what everybody else was doing. Not really, but I got a band together with a friend of mine that is still my bandmate and musical soul brother, and then we still make music to this day. But yeah, we tried to make it big in music. Moved to different cities with different management, and had a great time. playing some rock music, and I still have my guitars right next to me. Those things are always prominently by my side.
Yeah, I think that the funny thing about the guitars now is they're always prominently by our side. Like I have one, sitting over here that I want to get up and play, but I know we're also both husbands and fathers, so a lot of our time, when we're not doing deals and working on our respective businesses, is there's not as much time for the guitar anymore, but we will definitely find a time to eventually play. So that's the one thing that I've always been, impressed with you is, it's something that you've always kind of focused on as a passion of yours, right? Which I think has always helped, kind of amplify your workload because you always had that passion on the side that you had worked with. But, tell me about, I guess the family's, reaction to you graduate. So you graduated college and then you went right into the music thing, or were you doing the music thing when you were working for the family business? How did take me through that?
Yeah. So I graduated college and I was going to go. I was going to do law school. I was like, all right, well, I kind of want to do. It always fascinated me. I was going to do that, but then I was like, I was picking that guitar up and I was playing, and I was just like, this thing draws me. But I needed to also earn some spending money because my parents weren't going to, they weren't going to pay for anything, So I was like, I totally get it, and I appreciated that. So yes, I went to the low hanging fruit. I went to the family business and just did simple bookkeeping stuff, right? That they didn't care if I also had a band on the side, and that paid the bills while I was going through music, and then I was able actually. It was kind of nice. Every time I stepped in when I lived in Nashville, then I lived right outside New York City. I moved to those areas because of my band, but I got a job in each area with unbelievable people that became mentors of mine in finance and accounting, and I elevated myself in those disciplines, and it turned out like I got a great, we made some great music in my opinion. It's all personal taste and preferences. I also got to work with great people in business as well, and really cut my teeth and became a better business person because of it.
Yeah, I always say for me personally, the best thing about playing in a band was there was times where, and it was cool because my late father and my mom who's still alive got to see some of this, but there was times where people were trying to rip my clothes off because they were so excited to see me on stage rocking out. And then I've also been in the opposite situation where people were ready to throw beer bottles at me because they didn't want to hear what I had to say. So I always say, like, what's the best lesson that I ever learned from being a musician who played live on stage is I learned to really stop caring what people thought about me and what it was. And I feel like the less I thought about what I was doing and the more present I was in the moment, the more authentic it was, and the more people really loved the music that we put out. And I've taken that for me personally now into the business world. When I have to get up on stage, when I have to address a crowd, when I have to do all these things, I definitely have to put myself back into the mindset of when you were like so properly rehearsed, everything was so tight and ready to go. I don't know what would be your, I think maybe best lesson that you could take away from that experience?
Yeah, that was a great point. I had two takeaways from music that I still use to this day. And one was, if you make a mistake, just own it, play it again, and just keep going through it, because it doesn't matter if you make a mistake in music and you stop playing, the band falls apart. Like they can't support it. So you got to keep pushing through, and mistakes happen. If you're trying hard, you're going to make mistakes. So it's just that happens, and I think that's taught me perseverance, taught me push through, as well as the other one is psychology, right? You have band dynamics, and people get really caught up about like, this is my part, or this is my song, this is my baby, and you have to work through. The drummer's mad at the singer, the bass player is mad at the drummer, and how do you? And I was able, like my role was peacemaker. I was able to bring everybody back together when they hated each other and one went outside and quit the band. Bring everybody back together under a common cause, and that's helped me with my leadership, to this day.
Yeah. I would agree, right? Because I found that for me with music, at least, and I know we didn't expect for the conversation to go this way, But, for me, what I've always found was that's where I learned that I could be a good operator at that point in time when you think about music, because I knew at the end of the day what a good song or a good product would come out to be. And that's where I realized I had a passion for operations, and I could say, okay, John is more of the bean counter, right? And I know that if I can have John do his part in this, and then with a combination of this other person's strength, we could create a beautiful song together. And that might, the same thing goes with any kind of business, right? Where you can find the strengths of all the best people. There's some people that are a much better second chair than they would be a first chair, right? And, as a musical reference. And I think that's something that you and I have discussed at nauseum is, really recognizing what your strengths are as part of a larger whole. And that is how you can make some really beautiful songs and beautiful businesses together, for sure.
I love it. And it's like, that, Michael, have you've heard of EOS, entrepreneurial operating systems? Yeah. Yeah. So like, and it's like, there you go. Perfect. Like, and I love that process because right people, right seat. It's so important. I mean, you got to fit the culture, number one. But you got to be in the right seat for that. Like you might be a better second than you are first, and that's okay. That's okay. So I love it.
So, I think we can both say that, music is something that we are still, passionate about, but it's kind of taken a little bit of a backseat to our professional life. So, you recorded a very cool album, that I've had the chance to listen to and enjoy. And, we joke around with other people we know and have said this, right? They hear it and they go, oh man, like this is legit. Like this is real professional music. So something for you to be definitely, proud of. So what happened from there, from going from the family business to kind of going off onto your own? What, take me through a little bit of that process. What kind of insights, what occurred that kind of pushed you to get out of the family business to go off on your own?
Yeah. One of the biggest things that my family was a big proponent of, and I recommend this to every family business, is anybody that's within the family that wants to get into business, push them out for a while. And one of the biggest fears is like, will they come back? Well, if they don't, they're happy. They're happy doing something else. So it's a win. So the biggest thing is get out there, try something else, like learn to interact with other people, other businesses, because the things that you're going to learn and bring back to the business you cannot be taught within that business. And you get these skills and stuff like that. I wasn't ready to be a controller when I came back to the business from Connecticut. I was in a position to be the controller of the business because of what I learned along the way from the people I interacted with. But I wasn't ready, and I don't think I would have been ready had I just stayed in the family business from day one. So that for me is really fundamental, and it's great. And honestly, I didn't want to go back to the family business, but my aunt, unfortunately, she had stage 4 cancer. She was the treasury and had IT and accounting underneath her. She couldn't focus on the business because she had her health issues, and they had a big issue with their with the accounting department. So she called me one day and I said, like, Aunt Lisa, how can I turn you down? Right? I mean, like, I can't. It's my family, and that's important to me. So I came back, and it was.
So how long were you away for?
I was away for 4 years.
Okay, and then during those 4 years, you were in similar roles that you were with the family business, but just outside of them.
Yeah, like different. Like each one was different, right? So one was bookkeeping, and then I got to be a senior financial analyst, which was kind of like a controller for a small division. So I got to like really, cut my teeth in accounting and experience all kinds of things, including, publicly traded businesses and how they go through audits and all that, and various things that helped me prepare.
And just to give a little bit of color here, your family business, this isn't a small, operation. I mean, this is essentially a middle market company.
Yeah, they've done a great job. I'm always impressed with what my uncles, my family, and my great grandfather started. What they had accomplished. They've grown into one of the largest, if not, they are probably the largest, bulk landscape manufacturing company in the state of Ohio. They've built other businesses, have grown them, sold them, like just really masterfully done.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. It's funny because I hear from a lot of business owners, especially family business owners. I have my mom's brother who was a large, business owner. And he said to both of his sons, hey, if you want to come into the family business, you're always welcome here. But we would require you to go out into the world first and see what it is, and then earn that position in there. And I feel like it really hits different than, people that would just give you an opportunity versus having the opportunity to go out and earn it and learn it before you bring it into the family business. So, before we get into kind of where you went from the, working for the family business, are there any like really big lessons that you learned from it? I know you just shared one with me the other day. So when I was asking you for some advice on something, but I mean, what are some of the biggest lessons that you learned from your time, working there? And then, I would love to hear like, what is like one of the biggest, projects that they've worked on that's been the most meaningful?
Yeah. So, I'm grateful because the family business taught me a lot, right? It taught me how to, like, number one is integrity. Like, always be the person you want, like how you want to be in this world. Like each day we get an opportunity to step up and say, am I being the person in the world that I'm called to be? Am I being the person that am I creating good energy for this world? Right. And I'm doing that through being kind, being vulnerable, being honest, and like being like, hey, listen, I can make the best deal for myself, or I can do the right thing. Always do the right thing. And I think that was one of them. Like integrity. Other big one was teamwork. Like just treating people with respect all the time. My family was really big on that. Treat people with respect. Treat everyone, whether it was somebody that just started with our business that was cleaning shop floors. You treat them with respect. Treat them the same way that you would treat your family. The other thing is, I thought this was a great takeaway for family business in general. Is that like you got to look through the lens of we still want to be able to have Thanksgiving dinner together. So whatever, businesses are tough. They bring out sometimes the worst in all of us, and at times, and you're like, but you got to cut through that stuff and say, hey, listen, we're family. And it's important for us to figure that out and be able to sit across from each other at Thanksgiving and be a united front.
Is there something that you would do, or a certain practice or a certain habit or routine that you would tie to be able to kind of leave it on the field, if you will, before you would enter these things? Or is there something that you could kind of give as a takeaway to people to be able to, that, maybe they either work for a family business or they work for someone that they know, that they would have to have that, that day. I mean, there's a lot of husbands and wives that work together in a business, right? What's the best way for someone, in your opinion, to be able to kind of leave it on the field before you get to that time that's not business related?
Yeah, I mean, like, seek first to understand. Step away from it. Like, understand truly what that person is going through. Be empathetic to what they're going through, right? Got to let your ego go and just be like, hey, listen, there's somebody else here, and they deserve to have an opinion, and they deserve to have their opinion heard. And I am here to also understand. Okay, let me look through the lens that they have. But then also, how do I break bread with them outside of work? Get them outside the office. Get outside of the corners of an office. Go over their house. Have a cup of coffee, right? That's simple stuff like that.
Yeah. I guess my question for you then would be, you are being the one that's kind of being brought into the family business, right? You're not bringing someone in the family business. You were brought into it, right? How do you make sure that your needs are being met, as part of this kind of contractual, that's something that would be interesting for me to hear, right? Because it's almost like one of those things I think about with a family business. It's like, you should be so lucky that you were asked to be a part of this, right? How do you defend your own integrity, your own needs, your own wants, your own desires, your own lifestyle, and still be a part of this family business? Or is that something where, like, if it can happen, you probably should just walk away from?
Yeah, well, you also got to know like what you're getting into and what you're willing to do, and that's part of like honoring yourself. And there were times in my life where I didn't do that very well. I think the couple things is, number one, you'll have casual conversations with your family. They'll be embedded in your mind. You'll think that that you've solved that problem, or that's the way you're going to go forward with whatever deal that you just made. But that's not the way the other person maybe saw it. So even in family business, you've got to get it in writing. Get stuff in writing, get agreement, and then also like just be able to have a voice. If you feel like your dad, your uncle, your aunt, your mother, whomever your family business is constructed of, if they're dressing it down and you don't like it, you got to have your voice and say, hey, you know what, I don't appreciate that, or just be able to say, like, I think we could do this another way, because you're not going to add any value to your family business coming in and not being who you are and standing up for yourself and standing up for your ideas and your thoughts. That's important. Now, it's also important to, when you get in there, learn, observe before you formulate opinions. But then once you have those opinions, you got to make them known and be proud of those.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, you left the family business for 4 years, you came back, and then how long did you stay involved with the business, before the next, kind of point in your career?
I was there for a little over 10 years. Yeah, when I came back.
And so you were there for 10 years. How old were you when you decided to transition out of the business?
When I decided I was 39.
You were 39. Okay.
Yeah, I was 39.
All right. So at 39 years old, that you're getting close to one of those kind of checkpoints in your life, right? 40. Was that when you realized, okay, this ship has sailed? Like, what made you decide that you kind of wanted to move on into your own life, and where did you decide to go from there?
It was uncomfortable because I loved working with my family. I mean, I just visited them this past week, and I love them. They're great people, and we have a deep respect for each other. I love the team that I constructed there with the help of others. Like I got to work with my brother on a daily basis. There was a lot of positives there. Problem is that the woman that I met and fell in love with lived 365, almost 400 miles away. In life, you've got to follow your heart, and you got to be who you are no matter what. The draw to family business is huge, and it can be also the kind of like the negative side of it is there can be some kind of like hooks in you, and you feel like you can't get out. But if you feel so strongly that like, hey, like my stepson and her were here in this state, and I needed to be there, and I couldn't be honest and run that business effectively from 365 miles away, or I would just not be home, and we'd be doing the same thing we were doing, because my wife and I dated for almost 3.5, 4 years, going back and forth each weekend. I would drive, she would drive, I would drive, she would drive, and it was like, okay, we can't keep doing this.
Yeah, you had to honor that. You had to honor that relationship. Yeah.
So ultimately, I made the decision, took the leap, and honestly, it's been a blessing, because I love my family so much. They're my inspiration every single day.
So what did you decide to do at that point? So just to give people a little bit of color. So John's family business is in Ohio, and John's 360 miles away in I guess I would say the middle of the state of Pennsylvania is where your wife and stepson live. So how did that conversation go when you were, stepping away? I mean, was there the understanding, because it wasn't like, okay, I'm going to go work for another, renewables, natural renewables company in Pennsylvania. See you guys. So, how did that conversation go? And then what did you decide to do from there? I mean, that must have been scary, because you had, I guess, some amount of safety, right, in that family business. Like, you would hope that they wouldn't, kick cousin John out of the business.
Yeah, there's like, yeah, the good thing about the family business is there's less of a fear of job on the line. I mean, although I never took that for granted. I always felt like, I'm going to be judging my performance, but at the end of the day, that was one of the hardest conversations I've had to have, because my uncle, who was the main person for running that side of the business, he and I have a very good relationship, and he put me in charge because I was the next, I was who he hadn't selected, and he thought he had his bench, and I had to go to him and say, what you thought you had, I've changed my opinion, and that I honestly had delayed it for a month talking to him, because I was like, I felt so like bad about it. Like, I was like letting everybody down. I felt bad about my team. I felt like I was letting my team down, but I knew in my heart of hearts I was doing the right thing. Doesn't make those conversations easy. It makes it.
So how did it turn out? How did it turn out?
At the end of the day, like in everything in life, time heals it all. It proves everything. It's just like we still have an unbelievable relationship. They selected an unbelievably capable person to run the business. He did an excellent job. They got another guy who was a member of my team, my cousin-in-law, who's running it now. I couldn't be more proud of him. So they're just kicking butt, and that's been great to see. My team's been awesome there, and like I said, I've got an unbelievable family.
So when you left the business and then you moved to Pennsylvania, you get married, what did you decide to do from there?
I didn't know what I was going to do, because I had no. So one of the things that was scary for me was I left my entire network. The business that I was running and where I lived, just so everybody knows, I lived in Cleveland, Ohio. So all my network, everything that everything was in Cleveland or Northeast Ohio, some in Columbus, and I was leaving that entirely.
That must have been scary.
Oh my God! Like, it was wow. Like, I'm jumping out of the airplane. I don't think this parachute's on. I don't think I have it on my back. And this was in the middle of COVID too. So this was 2020. I moved out here in 2020, right in March, I think, and it was. So I couldn't meet with people. So I was like, I couldn't build up my network either. So it was a challenge, and it felt very isolating. And I'm still building up my network today, right? It's a process, but it's been a blessing, because it forced my hand into like another area and have to build relationships in another area. So now I still have my Cleveland relationships, and I have these too, which is kind of cool.
Very cool. So what did you decide to do? I know you had your hands on a lot of different things, but what did you decide to do?
Yeah. So what I ultimately decided to do was, I met a gentleman through my cousin who went to grad school with him, and he liked him a lot. His name is Nirav, and he runs his family office in Berkeley, California, and we started talking, and we hit it off, and ended up raising some venture capital monies for some SPVs, as well as some real estate, like multifamily, because I had a small multifamily business that I was on the side, and so I understand that asset class, and so we were able to look at that. So I basically put my finance hat back on, and I started becoming like a financier again, and I'm like, oh, this is kind of interesting, kind of cool. I never knew much about venture capital prior to the education that I went through, so I got to immerse myself in that industry and understand that more, which I always like learning. And then ultimately, we went from there to I had an itch to get into operations again, to run a business again, and we were going to roll up electrical contractors. That's what we were. So I was looking for. I was hunting for small, small, medium-sized electrical contractors. Roll them up. While we were doing that, Nirav was looking at his network, what technology was coming in through the venture capital arena, and we kept seeing EV charging. So we decided, all right, well, let's start an EV charging business from scratch, and then eventually we'll kind of start bolting on electrical contracting to it. So we started this Coral EV in 2022. Unfortunately, Nirav's son got liver cancer, like right to start 2023. So we, all best plans, you got to figure it out. So thankfully, his son is now cancer free. Is a blessing. Yeah, I know. And then, but we had to figure it out. We had to like grind and figure it out and say like, okay, what are we going to do here? So
cool. So then, you've grown, Coral, EV, and it's interesting, right? Because I feel like there's this constant theme of renewable sustainability, right? Because I'm hearing this kind of common theme. So what do you think drew you to that? Is it come from the experience in the family business?
Yeah, totally. Like, so the biggest thing that my family businesses did that was kind of left of center or trend setting was back in. I remember this back in the 1980s when I was like 8 or 9. We had like Earth Day or whatever, and they brought in, my family business brought in like we were promoting recycling and all this. And, we had contracts when I was there. We had contracts with, large municipalities doing yard waste, converting yard waste into organic products and beautifying soils with it. Biosolids from the city of Akron. We were doing all these things before they were kind of like cool or cutting edge. And then we were taking pallets and turning them into mulch. We were taking foundry sands and using it as sand in soils. We were taking all these waste streams. And then when I was there, my brother and I created a concept of working with port authorities to recycle sediments, because the Great Lakes, especially Lake Erie, have sediments that they were just kind of basically dredging and dumping in the lake. But what they were finding was there was algae blooms that were happening because of all the runoff from the nitrates and stuff like that. So we devised is we can use these in soil and beautify them. So we would take them, recycle them in the soil, or take them and stabilize property, remediate brownfields, all these kind of things that we can do with these sediments. So instead of dumping them, we said let's manage them in a better way. And we created that through sediment management, and that's like kind of like now one of the core pillars of the business, which is totally fantastic. And then on the renewable side, I'm like totally intrigued by solar and how you can create cost savings. My mind goes to, because this is my counting, always goes back to how do we save money? Like how can we, but do it in a great way. So like EVs. Like fleet of EVs. That's where I think a lot of this is going to go eventually, where you're going to look at it, and from a bottom line standpoint, it's going to save your business money. And just like solar, it's going to save your business money. Recycling, instead of throwing it in a landfill, saves your business money. So I look at all these things as like they're great for the earth, but they're great for your bottom line.
Huh. Very interesting. So now, I don't want to, spoiler alert, as far as Coral EV, you've grown that business to a size now where you're kind of interested in moving on to the next thing in your life. So what I'd love to hear is kind of what's next for John Ziss, and how this commitment to sustainability that's kind of brought that's in your heart. How are you going to approach that? I know what's next, right? But how are you going to take that approach in the next part of your life?
Yeah. So I've always had while I was at Kurtz, I did we did some M&A.
Yeah. Kurtz is the family business. So I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, so I was there. We did a lot. a lot of like, not a lot of, we did some M&A. And the reason to do that is because when you think of bulk landscape products, they're heavy. So you can only transport them like economically, feasibly within 25-mile radius of where you're shipping them from. So we went further south, did an acquisition, and we did a couple more that made strategic sense. But in doing that, I really liked that. I was like, oh, this is a nice blend of like finance, leadership, because you got to like implement your 100-day plan. You got to get people used to your new environment. You got to be welcoming. You got to listen. You can't come in there with just like a hatchet and start. No, you got to have empathy. And so it's just we like all of that stuff, like the deal, like finding the deal, and then nursing it along, and then finally getting it done, and then implementing your plan, and then seeing people grow within that business, grow into your business. Like right now, one of the people that I was just told this recently, that one of the people that was brought in from the business that we acquired, she's now running all the stores for the entire business, which is unbelievable. I'm so proud of her. So that fired me up, and I was like, okay, well, maybe private equity is the right, because I've operated businesses, I've finance and accounting is my background. That's right now where I'm leaning more into. But I also have this itch about renewables. So like maybe it's going to morph into like a hybrid, like where it's like, how do we find businesses, but then find ways to not to focus on cost savings through renewables, waste stream management, and all these other those things that I know pretty well from my business dealings.
Yeah, no, I think that's really exciting, because I think that you and I've seen it in the EV, in the solar space. There's so much cost savings that can be there, right? And I think that would be very cool for you to, as you're looking through the lens of M&A and different opportunities and private equity, is how can you take all of these skills that you've learned over the years and be able to implement them into businesses that you would acquire, run, and grow, from there. Before we wrap up, I would be remiss if we didn't, touch on some of these things. You and I are both extremely passionate about personal development, and it's something that, you and I talk about on a regular basis. What are some of the things that John Ziss is doing on a daily basis to make you as powerful as you are as just a human being in general?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I'm so happy that you went here, Michael, because like it's you and I both know off camera, it's a big thing of ours. For me, I always say do what works best for you, but this is what works for me. You can't control, change anybody. The only person you can do that is yourself. So that's all you can control. That's all we really have control over is ourselves. So outside world comes in, we filter that through our core beliefs, whatever has developed us. But I'm really interested in how does that come in? How does our energy that we've stored up through past experiences that's negative, how do we let that go? How do we transcend and become like just the best version of ourselves possible, so that we can go in any situation being creative, kind, loving, like just and just collaborative, and just like again the best version of ourselves, and somebody cuts us off in traffic, we can kind of just laugh about it and just let it go and see what it is for really what it is, which is it is what it is. It's not a big deal. So what I do every morning is I have several books that I read that are kind of like my Bible. I journal. I read those. They get my mindset right for that. It's encouraging. It's filled with good reminders, and it helps me to kind of go back and really think about really kind of pause when something comes up, and then just be like, okay, I'm recognizing that. I see that. I see what I'm doing right now.
No, that's great. So, I mean, outside of kind of setting yourself up for the day, is there, I know you're a big reader, right? You mentioned that So like your morning routine, consists of, reading, journaling. I know you have your cup of coffee when you're
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
this stuff,
totally.
but what time
Yeah,
do you
Michael
start?
tried to drop that off of my schedule, and it didn't work.
What time do you typically start in the morning?
I typically start at I'm usually up between 5 and 5:15. I don't have an alarm clock. I just wake up. So between 5 and 5:15 in the morning, I get out of bed, and then I that's when I start my morning with meditation. Number one, before I even touch coffee or anything, I get on my meditation bench, and I do that. Then I do my morning readings, journaling. Once that's done, then I exercise my body. Right, exercise my body, and I do it efficiently because I know it's important for you, but I don't love it. I don't love exercising. It's not like some people love it. I don't love it, so I do it because I know it's good for me. So I get that done, and then I'm ready to go for the day.
No, that's great. That's great. So I guess what I would just ask, and I think the listeners would love to hear this is, you have a very great outlook on life. You've had so many different experiences that shaped you to make you who you are today as a person. When those negative thoughts come in, those negative beliefs, those negative things come in throughout your day, is there anything that you do to kind of bring yourself back to center? I think that's just would be helpful for people, right? Because I think a lot of us start the day with the mindset of, I'm going to crush today. I'm going to make this the best day possible. But then something happens, somebody does cut you off in traffic. You get a nasty email from a client, or a customer. What is it? What do you do to kind of change that in the moment?
Yeah. So what I've been working on, just like exercise, right? Exercise builds your muscles, builds your metabolism, builds your heart health, your lung health. Um, Practicing letting go techniques and meditation build that couple seconds difference between what comes up in your brain and your reaction to it. When you're able to, that comes up, and you're able to recognize it, then you're able to say, okay, what energy is that? Maybe it's fear of failure. Maybe it's maybe it's like, oh, most of it boils down to we're not going to be loved. We're going to be out in the streets or something of that. Like when that comes up, then you recognize it and you allow it. You say, hey, like this is a human emotion that I'm having, and then you let it go, and it'll eventually unwind. And that's pretty much easier said than done. Like I get, I'm sure you do this too, Michael, right? It's like you have a lot of good techniques, but like if you're in the throes of like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening, it's infinitely harder than somebody cuts you off in traffic.
Yeah. I think the point here is, and just like you said, exercise for people can be uncomfortable. It's not something they necessarily want to do, but after they do it, they feel good. And then that builds the habit from the positive things that come from it. And that's where I think I like what I think what it starts with is your daily routines. You're building that mind, I don't know what the best way to call it, that muscle in your mind to be able to recognize what's coming in, be able to label that as either something that's going to serve you or not going to serve you, and then find a way to kind of to change that. But it goes back to, you have to do it on a daily basis to be able to recognize it. You can't be half in or half out of it, right? Yeah. No, that's really, really, really awesome. So, I know you're kind of in the position now where you have a lot of, we always say, a lot of balls, in the air that we're juggling. You're trying to figure out the next thing. How can people find you? How can people get in touch with you? And, from your opinion, how could you be a helpful resource to one of the listeners here? And then, and how would they get in touch with you?
The number one thing for me is I love helping people. Like, so if somebody has a question, needs assistance, looks on my LinkedIn, which is, John-Ziss, Ziss. There aren't many John Zisses in the world, so I'm one of them. You'll find it. Reach out to me. Also, my email address, which I don't mind giving out, is john@coralev.com. And reach out. And what I can say is if there's somebody in my network you want to be introduced to, if there's somebody that you're compelled, like, hey, I have this idea, or I really feel like I want to do this, like, I'm happy to riff with you. That's no problem.
Yeah. I would also say for the listeners, if you're thinking about sustainability, you're thinking about renewables and how they could be applicable to your business, John would be a really great resource on that. And, when, this episode is produced, we'll make sure that we get, all of John's contact information in the show notes, so that you can, John, when John says he is a helpful resource, like, he definitely will respond back to you. He's been a great ally for me, and just someone, confidant for me. But before we wrap up, John, is there any, kind of last thoughts that you'd love to, to share with the listeners as we wrap up?
I think the biggest one is just, again, just be you, because there's only one you, and that's a great thing, because nobody else has the talents that you have. You're a great individual, and look at your day through that lens. There's nothing stopping you.
Absolutely. John, it is always a pleasure. Every time I see your name, every time I see your face, it makes me smile. It makes me happy.
For you,
my brother from another mother. So I certainly appreciate having you in my life. Thank you for coming on the show today. And we'll certainly love to hear what's going on next in your world. Maybe we'll have you back on next year, and another really cool story to be shared. So
thank you, my friend. I appreciate you.
Take care, John.